want to continue to talk about where you see the markets in India, Ruchir. And you talked about how you continue to be confident in investing in specific Indian companies that meet all the parameters and the matrix that you've laid out for us. Is it harder to find value in India today, given where prices are, given where valuations are?
You know, the biggest cliche in the world, I find, is that the easy money has already been made, right? Because you look back at the past and you find that it's been done. So I don't think that, there's always going to be opportunity out here. Yes, the fact is that a lot of optimism had crept in, and some of that optimism is getting deflated very quickly. But I don't think that this is ever going to be a market which is going to sort of just tank and be like Turkey and stuff. I see enough opportunities. I don't think that we are sort of sufficiently engaged. We see enough opportunity. There are enough high quality companies available out here. And the good thing, as I said about this market, I know there's so much focus on this conference about politics. That how much politics matters, elections are coming up, what's going to happen as far as elections are concerned.
You think it doesn't matter at all?
Exactly.
Or it's limited?
No, I think that the importance of politics in the Indian context is way exaggerated. So I love following politics. I travel every time there's a major election in India. I spend a week traveling with a band of people to figure out what really is happening in that election. It's fascinating. But one thing I've learned over the years is that do not draw any inference from the election results on what's going to happen to the economy or to the markets. And the markets is very interesting. That we think of markets as this sort of very efficient beast. The markets have always been, the Indian market has always been wrong, at least initially, about the politics. So my entire point is that it's fascinating to watch politics, but the economy is such, and the natural momentum is such that regardless of what happens in politics, a basic sort of trajectory for the economy will continue.
So you're saying that we'll course along on a 7% plus kind of growth rate, whether it's the NDA or another form of government in office at the center. But, every time we talk about 8% plus kind of growth rates, there is this talk about structural reforms. India needs to do structural reforms. You talked about the banking sector, for instance. These require a political majority. These require political will. It requires a significant amount of political capital. So then can politics really be irrelevant to the economic story?
No, I think that we are sort of, underestimating what the Indian polity is all about. And here again, there was a very interesting survey carried out. This was a world values survey carried out at the beginning of this decade, where people from different countries were asked, what is your sort of attitude towards the private sector? And India ranked amongst the lowest, which is that most Indians had a very skeptical view of the private sector in terms of that survey, compared to other countries. So I think that there is no constituency for carrying out the kind of reforms that, all the sort of economists and the Washington consensus wants the country to do, right? So I think that there was an opportunity possibly in 2015.
It's gone.
In terms of when you had a government with a great majority, and it took only a sort of barb about a Soot Boot Ki Sarkar and stuff like that for them to quickly shift course on that. So I think that Feb 2015, when the government really presented its first full budget, that was the one opportunity this government had of trying to do something absolutely dramatic. And I know some proposals like that were on the table then, about cutting the sort of tax rates down to ASEAN levels, the corporate tax rate in a very dramatic way to Make in India a fillip, about possibly even thinking about annulling the Bank Nationalization Act. These proposals were very much on the table. But I think at the last minute, the political will to do anything about it was limited.
Cold feet.
Yeah, partly because I don't think that they felt there's a constituency for this. And it was also partly because, and this is, I think, I've had this script for a long time, at the same time we changed our GDP methodology. So all of a sudden, we started to grow at 7% during the worst of times. And so then the sort of feeling sank in there, if we can do 7% at the worst of times,
why bother?
Then why bother doing so much more? And so therefore, I think that played a real big role out there. So if at all there was a chance for something dramatic to happen, it could have happened, according to me, in 2015. And also because you had a prime minister who has such great oratory skills that he could have tried to market this to a pretty skeptical Indian public. You have to give it to them that the Indian public is quite skeptical of the private sector, and there's still a sort of great faith in wanting government jobs and stuff. Things have changed, but that skepticism is still there. But you had the chance to try and do something very dramatic about it. So that was the only time when I was sort of waiting with bated breath. Otherwise, my sort of approach is that tune out of the politics. It's a total waste of time from an investing standpoint, from knowing where the economy is going to go, and that the country will continue because of its very low per capita income, a very low base. And there's so much penetration opportunity across sectors that the country will keep growing at its sort of natural buoyancy rate.
You believe that the Indian economy is more or less decoupled from its politics, and we will continue to traverse this 7% kind of growth rate.
Yeah, I don't know about I'm not going to stick myself to 7% because I think if the global economy has a downturn, there's no way that you get to 7%.
Sure.
And I think that there's a lot which can be done, but I think that that's just the reality of India, which is that we all have a long laundry list of what needs to be done. Some of it gets done, but it's more in the form of sort of incremental changes. When a new government comes to power, they all carry out some incremental changes, and by the time the government ends its term, it gets pretty much into sort of, quite complacent and much more about winning the election through populist schemes. That's just the pattern as far as India is concerned. But I think that, there's a bigger debate to be had here at some point in time, which is that why in this country is there such sort of skepticism also about the politics? One of the recent researches that we have done basically shows us this, that 2 out of 3 elections in India are lost. This is the mirror image of, let's say, the United States.
Okay.
So the United States, we did a similar exercise looking at the presidential elections and looking at the state governor elections. And there are more than 500 such instances since 1977, in the US as well, and India. And what we found here was that in the US, the opposite happens, which is the incumbent ends up winning the election. And in India,
so
the opposite happens.
There's no anti-incumbency there.
Exactly. I mean, it's very interesting. This term anti-incumbency has been coined in India. So, I'm serious about it. Anti-incumbent is the word which has been exclusively coined in India.
And it's an Indian phenomenon.
It's an Indian phenomenon.
So what makes it, why is this the case here in India then?
Exactly. And I think that this is where there's not been enough thought given to it. In terms of that, why is it that in India, the default option is throw the bums out, right? So like in India, we keep thinking that what will the politicians do? What will the government do, and what is the Congress party doing, etc. It almost doesn't matter. The default option for any party is to lose. Of course, there are 1/3 which win, but it's very interesting that we try to figure out, is there any common factor as to why these 1/3 of these people who win elections, why do they win elections? And is there a common factor as to why these 2/3 of people who lose elections, why they lose elections? I think it's easier to come up with why the 2/3 lose elections based on my travels. And I think the single biggest reason why those 2/3 of politicians in India lose power is because the state is broken. And I really believe this. The average person basically every 5 years just wants change because he or she perceives that not much has changed
for me.
Not much has changed for them on the ground. And of course, there are some other peculiarities which make the default option in this country to just throw the bums out. One of them is that it takes very small vote shares, as you know. 4-5% vote swings, and you get massive swings as far as seats are concerned. The other sort of reason, I think, is also because of the fact that the political funding in this country is all done privately. And so winning in elections has almost become like a business, which is that you need to spend money to win it. And then when you win it, you want to try and recover the money.
Yes.
And it's very tempting not to keep a part of it.
So the BJP should be worried, the NDA should be worried at this point in time?
I don't think it's
just going by data.
Yeah.
I'm not asking you to make a prediction.
No, as I said that, it's very hard to predict, it's so early in the game. But my point is the fact that that's the default option. That is just the history of Indian elections. Now the question is that there are some states which have been able to beat this trend. Gujarat was one of them, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Delhi before that. They were able to beat this trend of anti-incumbency. question is, was there a common explanation? But for every explanation, I have an opposing case. There's the Chandra Babu Naidu, who was the hero of the reform movement in the early 2000s. Yeah. He lost in 2004. I still remember traveling to Rajasthan in 2003. And, of the 25-odd election trips that I have done, that was the one election trip where I can say that the group read it wrong. Usually when we go out on the road and we talk to people, we are able to sort of get the feel right. And part of it was because just before we had gone, Ashok Gehlot, who was the chief minister, he had just been awarded as being the best chief minister of the country. The growth rates had picked up dramatically in Rajasthan. It was very visible in terms of what was going on. So we went with the preconceived notion almost that he's going to win. And even though we got some discordant noises, we ignored it on the ground. And he lost. And he lost pretty badly that election. And I think that, that just showed you that even if you carry out, like a lot of economic reforms and you do something, the default in many states is still to lose. So there are many states in this country, Rajasthan, Karnataka, where every 5 years, no matter what happens, you just change the government. Same thing was happening in Tamil Nadu until she beat the trend in 2016. And she beat it for all the wrong reasons. All the business people, when we went there, told us about how poor the state was being run on the ground. Yeah. There was rampant alcoholism. But yet, because the opposition was sort of fragmented, and she was able to do a lot of populism, including alcoholism, which she sort of abetted, they were able to win that election. Right? So, and the same thing happened in Punjab. Since 1968 or something, Punjab had never re-elected a government, and it went the other way once and broke a trend. So I think so this is the broader point, that the average experience of the average Indian is so harsh with the government, with what it perceives to be the government, that their default option every 5 years is just to change.